Hey, everybody, and welcome back to
For the Booze.
Hey, I like that.
I've never tried that before. I've never even thought of it.
I like it.
Well, we're back for another week, and I'm just going to come right out and say it. No listener story.
No.
I don't even have a promo or anything to play this week. It's been kind of a weird week, though. I've been laid up all week.
Yeah, hurt your back.
Yep.
Oh, poor guy.
Getting old. It's been great. It's still not that great, but I can sit in a chair and do a show.
Hey,
so,
there we go.
Whatever.
That's all we need.
So remember, gang, looking for those listener stories still. Never gonna stop asking.
Nope.
Never.
We love them.
But we're gonna move on to the show. And this week we are taking the suggestion from Cam over at Music for the Quarantine Soul.
Yay.
He told me about this place. I had never heard of it. And when I looked into it, I thought, man, this is very interesting because I've literally never heard of this place at all, which is, I have a feeling is going to be a lot of stuff that we hear about in Canada because we don't really know a lot about Canada.
Right.
And we are going to a little town, province. I don't know how they do their stuff up there, but we're going to Manitoba. I couldn't even tell you where in the country that is.
Manitoba.
But we are going to visit something that is very similar to some things that we've done on here. And the reason I wanted to do this is because I kind of wanted to get a comparison.
Ooh.
I wanted to see what it was like compared to ours during this time period. So we're going to Manitoba. We're going to
the Ninette Sanitorium.
That's right. We are going to Ninette Sanitorium, which is actually in again, our Canadian friends, I know we have some listeners. Don't get mad at me. I just don't know how your towns and stuff work. I don't really know if it's like the town of Manitoba and the province of Ninette. I don't know how it works. I know it's in Manitoba. Maybe Manitoba's like a county.
Maybe.
And Ninette is like the town within the county. That sounds like it would be right.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah.
I mean,
tweet at us if I'm wrong.
That's how it is here.
Yeah, well, I guess we can't expect everybody to do it like we do it, but...
No, and I mean, over in England, they have like 5 different things in an address.
I think it works the same in Canada, though.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of what it seems like. Whatever. Tweet at us, Canadians. You can be mad at me. I'm trying. I'm not doing it on purpose. I just don't know. I'm an uneducated Floridian.
But hey, I bet you're going to educate us on the Ninette Sanatorium.
We're going to learn some stuff about Ninette Sanatorium. And actually, I reached out to Cam after I did some of this research because there is going to be some stuff in this show that I'm going to warn people. I will make another disclaimer before I get to it, but if you are sensitive when it comes to child abuse and child molestation, I'll let you know when to go ahead and skip ahead. It does get pretty gnarly at a certain point in the story. So
listen, I can deal with a lot, okay? Like listening about a lot, even the ones where we're like, man, that was really bad. Mm-hmm. But when it comes to like children.
It was when, it was when we did the McDonald's Hotel in Canada and the little boy got attacked in the stairwell.
Yep.
It's going to be.
I was the one who had to read that.
It's going to be a little reminiscent of that. Maybe not as detailed or anything. Man. But like I said, I will give I'll let you know when we get there. So listeners, if you don't want to listen, I totally respect that. And you can just skip ahead a couple minutes. But what do you say? I say it's not all terrible. Yes, it is. Oh. But let's just get into it.
Okay. Let's do it.
Ninette's original post office was established in 1883 on a site near Overend Lake. It was later moved following the construction of the Northern Pacific and Manitoba Railway in the area to its current site near Pelican Lake, closer to the railway. In 1926, Ninette became an unincorporated village. There are multiple theories as to the name of the community, including being named informally for French actress or waitress, the deceased daughter of a local resident, or a character in a novel that was being read by a postal inspector in the area, the name being short for Antoinette. The Sanatorium Board of Manitoba operated several tuberculosis sanatoriums in Manitoba from the early 1900s until the 1960s. These sanatoriums were established and administered to house and care for those living with tuberculosis. At the time, effective treatments were not available to treat TB. Instead, patients were isolated from the general public and prescribed rest and good nutrition. The Ninette, or Manitoba Sanatorium, was built in the town of Ninette, on the shores of Pelican Lake in 1909. Consisting of many buildings, but specifically to serve as a sanatorium, the lake view, tree landscape, and stone buildings all contributed to a picturesque setting. This setting was purposeful, as TB treatment up until the Second World War consisted primarily of rest, good food, and fresh air. A large veranda was built on the front of the sanatorium to accommodate the patients in their beds while they took in the fresh air. Surgical procedures were incorporated into treatment plans in the following decades. Ninette Sanitorium is the largest and longest operating sanatorium in the entire province. It opened with provisions for 60 patients in 1909 to 1910, but expanded rapidly. In just over a decade, the hospital could accommodate 280 patients. Ninette was at the center for TB treatment in Manitoba, and in 1926 became the base for mobile X-ray clinics, the first preventative health program in Canada. In the late 1940s, advances in the development of medications for the treatment of TB to reduce the need for patients to spend long periods in sanitariums. After obtaining approval from the provincial government, the board began the gradual conversion to other uses of the beds in the existing sanatoriums around the area. Now, it's not clear when Indigenous patients began being treated at Ninette. The hospital admitted primarily non-Indigenous patients until hospitalization rates among those groups began to decline after the Second World War, leaving open beds that needed to be filled. First Nations, Métis, and Inuit men, women, and children, including 80 Inuit who were sent from Eskimo Point in the Northwest Territories in 1963, soon filled a disproportionate amount of the beds. The treatment of First Nations and Inuit patients was paid for by the federal government, while the treatment of non-Indigenous and Métis patients were paid for by the province. The Ninette Sanatorium did remain in operation until 1972, when TB treatment was wholly transferred to the Central TB Clinic in Winnipeg. In 1965, a pavilion at Ninette was converted into a, quote, social orientation and work condition unit called Pembina House, funded by the province of Manitoba and supported by a federal, provincial, Canadian Vocational Training Agreement program. Pembina House used some of the same facilities as Ninette, including the dining room, but students at Pembina House did not actually have tuberculosis. Rather, the goal of Pembina House was education and integration, and activities included work conditioning, social and academic upgrading, and employment guidance. Pembina House was closed in 1972, at which point Ninette also closed. The entire grounds was then transformed into the Pelican Lake Training Center, which operated from 1973 to the year 2000 and provided living accommodations and training to people with intellectual disabilities until it closed in 2000. In the early 2000s, the site was operated as a Christian retreat and conference center. The buildings today are now privately owned. There are several monuments on the former sanatorium site. One monument, erected in 1960 by former patients of the Ninette Sanatorium, commemorates the 50th anniversary of the facility and was dedicated to its staff, including physicians Alfred L. Payne, Edward L. Ross, Donald L. Scott, and D. A. Stewart. Another monument near the former administration building commemorates Dr. Stewart, the first superintendent of the facility. He is also commemorated by a historical marker erected at the site by the Historic Sites Advisory Board of Manitoba. Now, most of us Americans think of Canadians as being our friendly neighbors to the north, and for most accounts, that seems to be true. As much as I'd like to tell you that at the end of the story, the country was on the cutting edge of medicine and that's where the story ends, but unfortunately, it couldn't be farther from the truth. Terrible things happened at the sanatorium, almost exclusively to the indigenous people. I found an article from aptnnews.ca that reads as follows. This is going to be the part where, if you're sensitive to hearing certain things about children and people in general, just go ahead and skip ahead a few. As some indigenous survivors of so-called Indian hospitals gear up for class action lawsuits, others like Paul Alictaluk being flooded with memories of child abuse. Quote,
"I don't care about the money,"
he said.
"I just want people to know what happened to us."
His voice trembled with emotion as he told his story to APTN Investigates for the first time outside of his immediate family. Quote,
"What I remember is that there were a bunch of us over there. I remember their faces," he said. "I was just little, 4 or 5 years old."
He recalled being given strong medication at the sanatorium where he was sent for tuberculosis treatment. He said his body wasn't able to handle it. Quote,
"I could not hold it in my stomach,"
he said. Nurses would scold him for vomiting on the floor or the bed. They made him scoop it up and put it in the bowl of custard. Quote,
"They would mix it in and they would make me eat it."
Now that was far from the worst abuse experienced by the now 58-year-old. Quote,
"There were times I was taken to the washroom and they would put me in a little collar and they used to chain me in the washroom and turn off the lights,"
he recalled.
"Some nurses used to fondle my boyhood and stick their fingers in my rear. It hurt very much."
Alictaluk was among 80 Inuits sent to the Ninette Sanitorium during the 1963 Eskimo Point tuberculosis outbreak. The area is now known as Erviat Nunavut. He said he doesn't know how long he was at Ninette, but by the time he returned home, he could no longer communicate with his native-speaking parents. Quote,
"I remember going home. I only spoke English, and when I got home, I couldn't understand my parents,"
he said. He explained he tried to tell his parents what happened in his teens. Quote,
"I didn't bring it up again while they were alive because they didn't believe me. I just quit talking about it."
The memories of the abuse at Ninette haunted him through the years, leading to suicidal thoughts and angry outbursts. He eventually became a peace officer in Arviat, acting as a liaison between the RCMP and the community. After he married in his early 20s, he finally told his wife what had happened. Quote,
"She just hugged me for a long time, and that lifted me up. I felt a little better."
And again, we found another article from cbc.ca that reads as follows. It's an awful thing to think about. Shock therapy, lungs were removed as tuberculosis treatments. Florence Ganell was just a little girl in the sanatorium when she says doctors bound her to a gurney, pumped her body with electric currents, and then took notes as her fingers curled. Her arm shook and her neck strained backwards. It was 1953. The Ojibwe girl from Rolling River First Nation was at the sanatorium to be treated for tuberculosis. Today, she believes it was no treatment. It was, she says, a medical experiment, and she was their, quote, guinea pig. An assessment that she shares with hundreds of survivors of the sanatoriums, which have been closed for decades. Quote,
"I'm telling you, my fingers were beginning to twist sideways. It was so incredibly painful,"
said Janelle, now 72. Quote,
"And now, to come to the conclusion our people were experimented on, It's an awful thing to think about.
She still does not know why the doctors performed the electroconclusive therapy. She still does not know why she was sent to the Brandon Sanatorium. At the time, she was attending residential schools outside Brandon. She had bad leg pain with no known cause. Finally, the nuns decided to send her to the sanatorium, saying she might have tuberculosis in her bones. She didn't. In fact, years later, a doctor told her she had no evidence of tuberculosis at all. But that didn't stop doctors from ordering extreme bed rest for 6 months, so strict that she was not allowed to get off the mattress, even when they changed the bedding. That didn't stop the doctors from slicing open the back of her thigh to explore her bone, only to sew it back up, scarring her for life and leaving her with a permanent limp. She had been, in the doctor's opinion, experimented on, maybe in good faith, but without merit and without consent. Mary Jane McCollum, an associate professor with the University of Winnipeg, is researching what went on in Indian hospitals, as some were called then, and sanatoriums. She has heard stories similar to Janelle's from other sanatorium survivors and does know this. Indian hospitals were long the training ground for medical students. Parents of young patients were often hundreds of kilometers away in remote reserves, unaware of the procedures and therefore unable to give consent. Quote, "There were a lot of unanswered questions and a lot of power in the hands of doctors," unquote, McCollum wrote in the email to CBC. Gerald McIver agrees. Back in 1952, his brother Michael was just a child when he was diagnosed with tuberculosis and sent to the sanatorium in Ninette, Manitoba. Decades later, he bore the scars, disabling, disfiguring markers where doctors surgically removed the back rib and lung behind it as a theoretical treatment for the tuberculosis. Quote,
He always wondered, why? Why did they do that?
McIver said about his brother, who died in 2000 and remembered the searing pain and little else. Years later, Dr. A.L. Payne, a preeminent physician who was previously the medical superintendent of the Ninette Sanitorium, explained he performed these surgeries with just local anesthetic. In a January 1979 paper published in the journal Canadian Family Physician titled, quote, "Tuberculosis, Past, Present, and Future," he wrote local anesthetic was used, quote, "to avoid spread of disease during general anesthesia," unquote, and that patients willingly agreed to it. Quote, "Looking back, one must regret the frequent use of chest surgery attended at times by some deformity or reduced respiratory function," unquote, Dr. Payne wrote, while arguing, quote, "Many patients would have died without surgical aid," unquote. Today, there are other answers, though some are hidden in the storybooks. In the first half of the 20th century, tuberculosis on reserves was a significant problem. The thinking at the time was that it was because indigenous people lived in the wild. According to an article in the August 1939 Canadian Medical Association journal, quote, "The Indian is still a wandering wigwam dweller at heart and adapts himself poorly to living in houses," unquote, and has, quote, "a native stubbornness and intolerance to interference that makes clinic work difficult," unquote. But under the Indian Act, it was legal to seize kids suspected of having tuberculosis and send them to sanatoriums, sometimes directly from their residential school. It was also seen at the time as a financial win-win, medical historians say. The practice kept numbers up in both residential schools and sanatoriums where funding was tied in part to quotas. So, by the 1950s, even though there were better therapies available for tuberculosis patients and therapies that could let them heal at home, indigenous patients continued to be detained longer, sometimes years longer, than the rest of the population. Here in the States, we have our own troubled history. By no means are we any better than anybody else. When originally looking into this episode, I was not expecting to find the things that I came across. Child abuse, abduction, molestation, and even medical experimentation. I don't think it's any wonder to anybody who has listened to this as to why this location could be haunted. Sometimes the friendliest of neighbors hide the darkest secrets. And that's the story of the history of Ninette Sanitorium.
That was rough. That was a lot.
Well, this is what I was saying in the beginning, was that I had originally looked into this and I did not know what to expect. So I got this as a suggestion from somebody who lives in this town.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess when I hit him up and I asked him about it, and I was like, hey, man, this place you told me to do is super messed up. And he's like, I have no idea about the history of it. It's just an old cool building.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, oh, man, it's pretty bad.
God.
It's pretty bad. So, and there are other personal stories, but I just wanted to get a few in there. And even as I was reading, I was having a hard time reading those, like the stuff. I don't even want to repeat it, honestly. You listen to it. I don't need to repeat it.
Yeah, that they were talking about their personal experiences.
Man, it's so gross. And some of it is just so bad and just horrible and tragic that, I mean, not even just the kids, but all of them, they all went through this.
Yeah.
And of course, it's worse with the kids, but they were all forced into it. They didn't have a choice.
Right.
And don't even get me started when it comes to, like, Native people in their own homelands, because you know how I feel about it.
Yeah.
You, Megan, not the listeners. So
I know.
I have such a hard time reading that. And I got to tell you, all you people out there who are the descendants of people who went through this, I'm sorry. It
Absolutely
should have never happened to you.
Absolutely.
And it's awful. It should have never happened here or anywhere else, honestly. But I wasn't expecting that. And it just took me aback all day long. When I was reading it, it was killing me. And some of it, like the vomit thing, was so gross. I really was not expecting that. That was out of left field. But it's rough.
I feel like the more we do these tuberculosis treatment centers, the more and more we find that they were just awful.
They're torture houses.
Absolutely. Like,
I mean, look.
Why in the world would any of that come to ending tuberculosis? I get that they didn't
Well, at the time, though, they didn't know. So they thought these were legitimate cures, because if you bring people in and you did these things to them and then they survived, the fact that they survived just means that the tuberculosis ran its course. It didn't mean that what they did saved them. But medicine was a lot more primitive back then. Mm-hmm. So to them, that meant that treatment worked. So they could do that to everybody. I
mean, I get all that, but why so bad? Why so bad?
I don't know.
Not even like the treatment of the people. I mean, like the treatments themselves.
Treatments. You mean like cutting people open and flaying them and moving their lungs? Yeah, because I'm telling you, the only thing I could come up with is that they must have done it to somebody at some point, and they survived. Mm-hmm. They probably didn't happily survive, but they survived. So they thought, well, it's going to kill them. So if we can gain them a little extra time, then this is a legitimate treatment.
But what a crappy way to live the rest of your life.
It's awful.
After having those types of things done to you, whether it be one thing or the other or the other or the other that they did. Like, people were, like you said, disfigured and oh my God.
This is a little different than what we deal with here, because there are this is a big deal in Canada. Mm-hmm. Okay, I've heard about this many times. It's the First Nations people. That's what they call basically like our Native Americans, the originals. Yeah. And it was and I'm not trying to be offensive, so if it comes out that way to anybody, I truly apologize. But it was almost like Canada's version of like a Holocaust, where they were killing these people off in mass amounts, and they've been finding like mass graves with the First Nations people's bodies and children being raped and killed and mutilated, and it is a very tragic part of Canadian history, the stuff that went on with the First Nations people. And it's still going on because they're filing lawsuits now. So I don't know.
And good for them.
I mean, some of these stories were from like 2017, and I'll be honest, I haven't really checked up on any of the stuff since I heard it a while ago. I just hope that they got some kind of closure when it comes to this. Nothing will ever be able to fix this. These people these people are alive now.
Yeah.
That remember this.
Yep.
You can't fix that.
Not at all.
No,
there is no possible way that you could fix it. The only thing, like you said, is maybe some possible closure or some, I don't know what I'm trying to say, some
reparations of some kind. But the problem is that there's nothing you can do to make up for what happened to those people.
Never.
There's nothing.
There never will
and
be.
Just like they do here, they ship them all off to little pieces of land and say, well, this is for you.
No.
That's not how it should be.
No.
They should be like, here's your land. This is our land.
Mm.
They were here first. That's just my opinion. And look, I mean, I'm a white guy, so I have a tiny bit of Native American in me. Probably not enough to, I couldn't go move on a reservation or anything. And I grew up in a very Native American home, but maybe that's why I feel so connected to this all the time. It's just because my family and stuff. But it's crazy because when you think of Canada, you really do think of it as like, we all have this like almost joking thing in America that like Canadians are so nice that they,
right.
It's like a thing. It's like a joke.
It is. Absolutely it is.
But if you really look into their history, it's pretty dark.
I think history anywhere is dark, and it has its really, really, really bad things. But I think some things are just worse than others. They are.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
this is up there for a country
absolutely.
for a country that just seems to be the nicest people. Mm-hmm. They have some of the darker history. And just to swing it back around to the topic, I mean, all the stuff we talk about, having stuff being left behind and being haunted, I couldn't think of a better place that had, terrible things happen that would cause a spirit, if spirits are real, to not be able to move on. I mean, screw not having like unfinished business. This is a different level.
Yeah. Oh, it is. Absolutely.
This is like torture and fear and everything wrapped into one. So,
and we talk about those, emotions, the fear, the terror, honestly, not even just fear, and the absolute agony. Yeah. Really, like, where does that go? Where does that go?
Some people claim it doesn't go anywhere, and it traps them here. So there's no telling. But
just to put it out there,
I think we should go ahead and get into the spooky stuff.
Yay!
But before we do that, I think we'll take an ad break.
And now, Booze Crew, back to our show. Ninette Sanitorium, in the tiny town of Ninette, Canada, is known as being one of the creepiest locations in the entire country. The big, empty buildings used to house those living with tuberculosis at the beginning of the 20th century. People from all around Manitoba were sent here to be treated and hopefully recover. It was the largest sanatorium in the whole province, with hundreds of patients over the 62 years it was open. The sanatorium was also the site of abuse for many First Nations people who, when they contracted tuberculosis, were sent to the Ninette Sanitorium. The largest unfortunate outbreak being the Eskimo Point outbreak in 1963, where 80 Inuit were sent to the sanatorium from the Northwest Territories. They endured abuse as being forced to eat their own vomit and being chained in a dark room by the neck, and many were physically and sexually abused. Some of the buildings have fared better than others over the years. The administration building, where new owner Ronnie's desk and work quarters are, is the building in the best shape. It has a little museum and visitor center, as well as kitchen and offices. Those who have been there even say it's like a walk back in time. The sanatorium is rumored, and to some, confirmed to be haunted. Plenty of supernatural accounts and experiences have been witnessed on the grounds of this century-old property. Most notably, the spirits of 6 children who apparently like to tickle feet and fool around with the living can be found at Ninette. During the tuberculosis epidemic, the site saw thousands of patients. Some recovered, but a great deal never left. Like a scene from a horror movie, multiple layers of paint flakes off the walls of the darkened halls of the Ninette Sanitorium's long vacant nurses' building. Some of the property's buildings are in much better shape, fueling hope that they may one day be salvaged. But the nurses' building is rough. The air in certain rooms is thick enough with moisture that you can feel its weight in your lungs. About 4 months ago, Eric and JL, who also go by the Phantoms of Yore on YouTube, an exploration and paranormal team, went to Ninette Sanitorium to explore, and this is their story. The video opens up to a shot of the pair standing in front of Ninette Sanatorium, where you hear Eric say,
"We finally get the chance to come in here, and something's telling us to not go in. We get this really bad vibe."
And then Janelle says, giggling,
"So I guess we're going in. We're not gonna not go in, right?"
Eric answers her back by saying,
"I've never had this feeling before, though."
to which JL says,
"I wonder if this means something's bad's gonna happen."
Regardless, they head for the main entrance and make their way up the stairs. And then something startles her, and they run back down the stairs. And the video begins. We see shots of various hallways and corridors, drywall missing, studs exposed on the walls, and we end up in a small tunnel where Eric says,
"This is the only space so far that we have seen that gets us into the tunnels where bodies were passed through."
As they find themselves in the game room, Eric tells the story of a little boy who was on a tour. And when they found the little boy, he had been playing with another boy who was not there. This is the area that is said to be haunted by the spirits of 6 children, all of whom attended Ninette Sanatorium. As they're doing a walkthrough and telling the stories of the location, they focus in on a staircase found in the main building. After commenting about how creepy it is, that it could literally be used in a horror movie, they show something that shares a lot of similarities with the Winchester Mystery House. The staircase goes up about 10 steps, turns to the right, and ends at the ceiling, going nowhere. It should be noted that other viewers of the video in the comments section have made a claim that it's 7 minutes and 11 seconds on the outside of the building. You can see a male figure in the upper right-hand corner by the window, stating that he looks like either a doctor or administrator, and that he has short dark hair, a thin face, dark mustache, protruding front teeth, and big eyes, and appears to have a stethoscope around his neck, wearing a gray sports coat, and you can also see what looks like a boy with him, about 10 years old, with dark hair, freckles, and a round face. As the pair walk the hallway of the first building, they begin to say things to each other like, "Do you feel that? Like a presence that doesn't want us here?" As the team explore the building, it is noted within the comments section that at 12 minutes, 45 seconds on the upper wall, as they're walking downstairs, there is an old man with a salt and pepper beard with short hair who looks to be in his 60s. His eyes are just 2 white holes with no color. Getting a bad feeling, they leave the staircase and head back the way they came. As they entered the next room, they hear an unexplained knocking and start to feel panicked, and both turn and move quickly out of the area. They end up in a room with a gurney and decide to roll it out of the room and take it with them as they explore, hoping to trigger something within the building. Stopping just a room over, Eric stops and starts to look around, frantically saying,
Why do I feel like something's here?
While nothing is seen in the room, JL agrees with Eric, commenting on how the room feels creepy and that the air feels heavy, like something is off. They then head down to the basement and find the hole that leads to the tunnels that connect to each building. JL protests that she's not going through there, but Eric decides to go in himself. She reluctantly decides to join him inside the tunnel and asks him if he would like her to pass him the camera. They then venture through the tunnel, and a small flash of light can be seen on the other end as they are filming. They reach a point where the tunnel appears to be collapsed and turn around and head back out the way they came. As the second half of their investigation begins, they are joined by a musician named Liza. They start off in room 308, also referred to as the peeling room. The rumors inside of this room are that the bed moves on its own. They decide to run an experiment within the room. They decide to have Liza play music to see if it will stir up any activity. One of the investigators talks about how there is a Tickle Me Elmo doll that has been left within the room by another paranormal investigation team. It is rumored that they had left it behind because they believed it to have an attachment of some kind. He then shows us that the only way to activate this Elmo doll is to touch his nose, and he is also holding a REM pod. They have Liza start to play music in hopes that the spirits will interact with the REM pod or the Tickle Me Elmo doll. As she finishes singing a song, a strange EVP can be heard in the audio. It has a human sound to it, like somebody babbling, but nobody in the room was talking at the time. As she finishes up her third song, the camera picks up another EVP that says either
Find.
or
Flight.
the REM pod seems to not be very active, but EVPs are being captured. As she starts to play a song that she performs often, something seems to be throwing her off as she forgets the words to a song. Visually frustrated, she decides to move on to something else, but notes that it is very odd for this to happen, like something is affecting her in the room. It is then another possible EVP is heard. A voice is heard on camera saying,
Happy.
As she finishes up playing her music, they asked her how she felt, and she answers them saying that she feels shaky, that there's just something in this room that's making her feel not herself. Unfortunately, the REM pod nor the Tickle Me Elmo doll were ever triggered, but the personal feelings and EVPs were no doubt impressive. The video continues, and the third night of investigations is underway. This is where we find ourselves back at the beginning of this story, where Eric and JL are standing outside the original building, talking about how they feel that there is something that doesn't want them there. The video ends with both of them running away, never even entering the first building. There are many videos on YouTube of the group Phantoms of Yore investigating the Ninette Sanitorium, so make sure you go and watch them. Other paranormal groups have also investigated this location, like Paranormies on YouTube. While they are undoubtedly a well-liked and watched channel, we decided, due to a preconceived opinions and the possibility of one day covering them on this show, we aren't going to talk about that one. So again, go to YouTube and check it out. We do want to mention, though, early in their video, they make a claim that a medium was able to relocate some of the children's spirits to the game room, but one was left behind. That's up to you to decide what to think about that. Most of us would consider the country of Canada to be a sort of gentle place, but we need to remember they, like the rest of us, have a history that is dark and blood-soaked. The atrocities committed against the native people just can't be overlooked, and definitely should not be. We know these hauntings that have come from such horrible and disturbing things are hard to imagine. Because of the brutality that has taken place there, it's no wonder how something may linger. Darkness, fear, and utter terror are what most every one of these people felt up until their last breath. Who are the children still calling the game room at Ninette Sanitorium home? Could there be something more sinister keeping them all captive? But more importantly, will these tragic souls ever be able to find peace in death, despite all of the horrid things that happen to them in life? Will we ever truly know? But we pray they do. And we all hope, if you ever venture into Ninette Sanatorium, that the children let you go home like they were never able to do.
What a story. And I gotta say that it was actually, I almost like watching it. I was like, oh, I'd never even heard of these guys. I don't really want to watch this. And then as I sat watching it, I couldn't stop watching it.
Really?
It was actually a really good video.
Oh.
There wasn't a lot of stuff that happened. And I need to point this out, that the stuff you had mentioned in your part about that is 7 minutes and 11 seconds. I actually pulled those from the comment section. Somebody down there was commenting, at this time I see this, at this time I see this. I have to say that I think that person is a self-proclaimed medium or psychic of some kind.
Okay.
Because I went frame by frame and saw nothing. But I'm also watching it on my cell phone too, so I'm not trying to discredit anybody if they really did see something. I don't know. I tried, but I didn't see anything. So take it with a grain of salt or whatever you need to do. I'm not saying it's not true. If somebody saw something cool, I heard the EVPs.
Yeah.
And I have to say, another part of that, I was like, oh my God, I got to sit and listen to this girl with her guitar in this room. She had an amazing voice.
Oh, wow.
And it was super enjoyable.
So I kind of wish I would have watched it now.
I was going to fast forward through it. And the first song was a little shaky. But then after that, she hit her stride, and it was, I enjoyed it. It was really nice.
Well, good for Liza.
Yeah. Super, super great voice. So, but it was a very enjoyable video to watch. So if you are out there and this is something that interests you, go watch it. It's only about, I think it was like an hour long. And it's just, they're not investigators in the traditional sense. Like, they had a REM pod towards the end, but it was mostly just them walking the halls of this place, and it is creepy. Ugh. It's super creepy.
It's like one of those buildings that you see that's just literally falling apart around you and just gives off that vibe of like, ugh.
It almost, when they were inside, it almost kind of reminded me of the inside pictures of Taunton State.
Oh, okay.
It was like that, you know. Or even like Crescent, like the one we just did where we saw the pictures of like the walls peeling, it looked just like that.
Ugh.
So
it's always so creepy when the walls peel like
it
that.
Is.
Like,
it definitely is.
Oh my gosh.
It is. But yeah, I mean, that's Ninette or Manitoba, whatever you call it, Sanatorium. Awful things have happened there, and some pretty decent claims of paranormal activity. And I guess it's known throughout the area as being incredibly haunted.
Wow.
Like they do ghost tours there and stuff like that. So I mean, there's plenty of claims. I also went to Reddit, and I didn't write any of them down. There wasn't really any horror stories or anything, but Reddit had its plethora of people talking about it being haunted. Just like, oh, yeah, if you're in the area, go visit Ninette Sanitorium. It's
Yeah.
super haunted. But there was also stories about people who back in the 60s would go in there and walk around.
Huh.
Just stuff like that. So it's like a mixed bag of stuff. But
Yeah, that's pretty cool, though. I like that.
But, our show just wouldn't be complete if we went through and we didn't ask,
Is it real?
and I agree with me. I need to know as well. It's like I'm battling with my inner self every week.
I know, right?
So, Megan, I mean, we didn't have a whole lot, but we did have some stuff and some awful stories. So what do you think about Ninette, Manitoba Sanitorium?
I am not going to discredit any of the awful, awful things that happened there. But this one, for me, I think I'm going to have to go like a 50-50. And that is because in reading the story, I mean, I didn't watch the video. I just read the story that was laid out for me. And to me, it didn't seem like a true investigation. It didn't give me that, all right, we're hunting ghosts type of thing,
Yeah.
And I mean, could there be things there? Absolutely. Could there be lingering spirits because of the layers of, like we talk about all the time, of the energy that's left behind and things like that? I think this one, I need a little more from this place. So for right now, I'm going to say a 50-50.
Okay.
So what about you?
You're just leaving it on the fence.
I am. Yeah.
Well, I did get to watch the video, and I'm going to say a few things about it.
Okay.
It's a very creepy place,
Mm-hmm.
and people have a lot of claims there. But the problem is that when I watched the video, the first EVP sounded like a zipper, honestly. And it kind of just sounded like it was, like it just made a sound that kind of sounded like something.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem was, for me, was the second EVP, the one that they said happy.
Mm-hmm.
I know because I am a guitar player that was the sound of her strings going across, or her fingers going across the strings.
Oh, that ring?
Yes.
Oh.
I could hear it. I knew exactly what it was when I heard it.
Interesting.
But the only one that stood out was where it sounded like a voice, like babbling, because everybody in that room was perfectly quiet.
Mm-hmm.
And that it was just like a whispery blah, 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 out of nowhere.
Oh.
That's the only one. So I'm going to say that while it's creepy and cool, and people claim it is, without any solid evidence, I'm actually going to say I don't think it is right now.
Okay.
Unless I can be proven wrong later. To me, it just seems like a very creepy old building with a seriously terrible past.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the past part is, there's no asking if that's real. That happened. And that is tragic. So tragic. And I could see how the possibility of something being there could be there.
Right.
But from what I've seen, I'm just going to have to say no. I don't think it is.
Okay.
Which means this place gets
The big old seal of nothing.
So that's what it is. Unfortunately, we don't always hit one. You know, we gotta. You're gonna come across some every now and then that don't feel right. And unfortunately, this week, this one didn't get it. But maybe some more people will go out there and prove us wrong.
Oh, absolutely.
Maybe some team, like some well-known teams, go out there with some paranormal equipment and do it. But
I would definitely love to see some more extensive and thorough investigations
I think
done on this place.
I think another big part of it is that the children's spirits are really the only claim of paranormal activity that I have heard of. Outside of that, I didn't read anything else about it. So, yeah, that's what it is.
Well, some of them just don't stack up against some others.
But I have another one that we're going to do next week that has an almost horror movie-esque character.
Oh.
that haunts this place, or supposedly does. So definitely I'm going to have to come back and check that one out.
Well, I am excited.
So that's going to be the end of Ninette, Manitoba Sanatorium in Canada and all the other words. Where can they find us?
Oh, they can find us on Facebook at For the Booze and on Instagram at ForTheBooze_podcast.
You can also find us on Twitter at For the Booze, and over, of course, on YouTube, where we are just a popping sensation. We are so viral. No, we're not viral, but we're on there. You can check it out. It's just the episodes on YouTube.
Yeah.
And don't forget, listener stories. We want them so bad.
Please.
Yep.
Please.
Send those along with your show suggestions, or just to say hey. You can send them over to forthebooze12@gmail.com.
We'd love to say hi.
And I'm pretty sure there's something else we need them to do.
Yes. And that is to rate and review. Rate and review, 5 stars, anywhere you're able to.
Mm-hmm.
But Apple seems to be the most.
It's the one that they count the most.
Yeah. So, yeah, do that. Do that. That'd be great.
Indeed. That would be great. So I guess this is where this one ends, and we'll be coming back next week with what I'm hoping is a very scary, creepy.
I am so excited.
I think it's going to be kind of cool. It's another listener suggestion too, so pow.
Nice.
Well-
Well, Booze Crew, thank you for listening, and we will see you in the next one.
Bye.